Chapter 10 of The Mystery of the Four Fingers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Mystery of the Four Fingers by Fred M. White. Chapter 10. The Second Finger. It was perhaps fortunate for all concerned that though Venner was so closely identified by the irony of fate with the movements of Mark Fenwick, he was not known to the latter personally, though they had been almost side by side 3 years previous in Mexico. Therefore it was possible for Venner to get a table in the dining room quite close to that of the alleged millionaire. It was all the more fortunate, as things subsequently turned out, that Fenwick had returned to town that afternoon, and had announced his intention of dining at the hotel the same evening. This information Venner gave to Gurdon when the latter turned up about 7:30. Then the host began to outline the plan of campaign which he had carefully thought out. "Fenwick is dining over there," he said. "He generally sits with his back to the wall, and I have had our table so altered that we can command all his movements. Vera, of course, will dine with him. Naturally enough, she will act as if we were absolute strangers to her. That will be necessary." "Of course," Gurdon admitted. "But isn't it a strange thing that you should be an absolute stranger to Fenwick?" "Well, it does seem strange on the face of it, but it is capable of the easiest explanation. You see, when I first met Vera, she was at school in a town somewhere removed from the Four Finger Mine. I saw a good deal of her there, and when finally she went up country, we were practically engaged. At her urgent request the engagement was kept a secret, and when I followed to the mines it was distinctly understood that I should not call at Fenwick's house or make myself known to him except in the way of business. As it happens, we never did meet, and whenever I saw Vera it was usually by stealth. The very marriage was a secret one, and you may charge me fairly with showing great weakness in the matter. But there, I have told you the story before, and you must make the best of it. On the whole, I am glad things turned out as they did, for now I can play my cards in the game against Fenwick without his even suspecting that he has me for an opponent. It is certainly an advantage in my favor." Venner had scarcely ceased speaking before Fenwick and Vera appeared. She gave one timid glance at Venner, then, averting her eyes, she walked demurely across to her place at the table. Fenwick followed, looking downcast and moody, and altogether unlike a man who is supposed to be the happy possessor of millions. His manner was curt and irritable, and he seemed disposed to find fault with everything. Venner noticed, too, that though the man ate very little, he partook of far more champagne than was good for anyone. Thanks no doubt to the wine, the man's dark mood lifted presently, and he began chatting to Vera. The two men at the other table appeared to be deeply interested in their dinner, though, as a matter of fact, they were listening intently to every word that Fenwick was saying. He was talking glibly enough now about some large house in the country, which he appeared to have taken for the winter months. Vera listened with polite indifference. "In Kent," Fenwick was saying, "not very far from Canterbury. A fine old house, filled with grand furniture, just the sort of place you'd like. I've made all the arrangements, and the sooner we get away from London, the better I shall be pleased." "It will be rather dull, I fear," Vera replied. "I don't suppose I shall get on very well with county people." "Hang the county people," Fenwick growled. "Who cares a straw for them? Not but what they'll come along fast enough when they hear that Mark Fenwick the millionaire is in their midst. Still, there's a fine park round the house, and you'll be able to get as much riding as you want." Venner, watching furtively, saw that Vera was interested for the first time. He had not forgotten the fact that she was an exceedingly fine horsewoman. He recollected the glorious rides they had had together. Interested as he was in the mysterious set of circumstances which had wound themselves into his life, he was not without hope that this change would enable him to see more of Vera than was possible in London. In the lonely country he would be able to plan meetings with her. Indeed, he had made up his mind to leave London as soon as Vera had gone. Moreover, in this instance, duty and inclination pointed the same way. If the mystery were to be solved, and Vera freed from her intolerable burden, it would be essential that every movement of Fenwick's should be carefully watched. The only way to carry out this plan successfully would be to follow him into Kent. "You heard that?" he murmured to Gurdon. "We must find out exactly where this place is, and then look out some likely quarters in the neighborhood. I must contrive to see Vera and learn her new address before she goes." "No reason to worry about that," Gurdon said. "It will all be in the papers. The doings of these moneyed men are chronicled as carefully now as the movements of royalty. It is any odds, when you take up your Morning Post in the morning, that you will know not only exactly where Fenwick is going to spend the winter, but get an exact history of the house. So far as I can see, we might finish our dinner and go off to a theatre. We are not likely to hear any more to-night, and all this mystery and worry is beginning to get on my nerves. What do you say to an hour or two at the Gaiety?" Venner pleaded for a few moments' delay. So far as he was personally concerned, he felt very unlike the frivolity of the typical musical comedy. But still, he had finished his dinner by this time, and was not disposed to be churlish. Fenwick had completed his repast also, and was sipping his coffee in an amiable frame of mind, heedless apparently of business worries of all kinds. At the same moment a waiter came into the room and advanced to the millionaire's table with a small parcel in his hand. "A letter for you, sir. An express letter that has just arrived. Will you be good enough to sign the receipt?" "Confound the people!" Fenwick growled. "Can't you leave me alone for half an hour when I'm having my dinner? Take the thing up to my room. You sign for it, Vera." "I'll sign for it, of course," Vera replied. "But don't you think you had better open the parcel? It may be of some importance. People don't usually send express letters at this time of night unless they are urgent. Or shall I open it for you?" The waiter had gone by this time, taking the receipt for the letter with him. With a gesture Fenwick signified to Vera that she might open the parcel. She cut the string and opened the flat packet, disclosing a small object in tissue paper inside. This she handed to Fenwick, who tore the paper off leisurely. Then the silence of the room was startled by the sound of an oath uttered in tones of intense fury. "Curse the thing!" Fenwick cried. His yellow face was wet and ghastly now. The big purple veins stood out like cords on his forehead. "Am I never to be free from the terror of this mystery? Where did it come from? How could it be possible when the very man I have most reason to dread is no longer in a position—" The speaker broke off suddenly, as if conscious that he was betraying himself. The little object in the tissue paper lay on the table in such a position that it was impossible for Venner or Gurdon to see what it was, but they could give a pretty shrewd guess. Venner looked inquiringly at his friend. "Well, what do you suppose it is?" he asked. "Personally, I have no doubt whatever as to what it is," Gurdon said. "I am as sure as if I held the thing in my own hand at the present moment. It is the second finger, which at some time or another was attached to Fenwick's hand." "You've got it," Venner said. "Upon my word. The farther we go with this thing, the more complicated it becomes. No sooner do we clear up one point than a dozen fresh ones arrive. Now, is not this amazing? We know perfectly well that the man whom we have to call Bates has been kidnapped by our interesting friend opposite, and yet here the second warning arrives just as if Bates were still free to carry out his vengeance. What can one make of it?" "Well, the logical conclusion is that Bates has an accomplice. I fail to see any other way of accounting for it." Fenwick still sat there mopping his heated face and turning a disgusted eye upon the little object on the table. He seemed to be terribly distressed and upset, though there was nothing like the scene on the previous occasion, and doubtless few diners besides Venner and Gurdon knew that anything out of the common was taking place there. But they were watching everything carefully. They noted Fenwick's anxious face. They could hear his stertorous breathing. Then, though he had dined so freely, he called for brandy now, a large glass of which he drank without any addition whatever. Then his agitation became less uncontrollable, and a little natural colour crept into his cheeks. Without glancing at it, he slipped the little object on the table into his pocket, and rose more or less unsteadily to his feet. "I have had a shock," he muttered. "I don't deny that I have had a terrible shock. You don't understand it, Vera, and I hope you never will. I wish I had never touched that accursed mine. I wish it had been fathoms under the sea before I heard of it. But the mischief has been done now, and I shall have to go on to the end. You can stay here if you like. As to me, I am going to my own room. I want to be alone for a bit and think this matter out." Fenwick lurched across the room with the air of a man who is more or less intoxicated, though his head was clear enough and his faculties undimmed. Still his limbs were trembling under him, and he groped his way to the door with the aid of a table here and there. It was perhaps rather a risky thing to do, but Venner immediately crossed over and took the seat vacated so recently by Fenwick. Vera welcomed him shyly, but it was palpable that she was ill at ease. She would have risen had not Venner detained her. "Don't you think you are being very imprudent?" she said. "Suppose he should change his mind and come back here again?"
I don't think there's much chance of that, Venner said grimly. Fenwick will only be too glad to be by himself for a bit. But tell me, dear, what was it that gave him such a shock?
I don't understand it at all, Vera said. It was something to do with that dreadful mine, and the vengeance connected with it. This is the second time the same thing has happened within the last few days, and I fear it will culminate sooner or later in some fearful tragedy. I have some hazy idea of the old legend, but I have almost forgotten what it is.
I don't think you need to worry about it, Venner said, though it will have to be spoken of again when the whole thing is cleared up. But now I wish to talk to you on more personal matters. Did I not understand Fenwick to say tonight that he was taking a large house somewhere in Kent?
That is his intention, I believe, Vera replied. I understand it is a large, dull place in the heart of the country. Personally, I am not looking forward to it with the least pleasure. Things are bad enough here in London, but there is always the comfortable feeling that one is protected here, whereas in a lonely neighborhood the feeling of helplessness grows very strong.
You are not likely to be lonely or neglected, Venner smiled. As soon as I have definitely ascertained where you are going, Gurdon and myself will follow. It is quite necessary that we should be somewhere near you. But, of course, if you object—
But Vera was not objecting. Her face flushed with a sudden happiness. The knowledge that the man she loved was going to be so near her filled her with a sense of comfort. "Don't you think it will be dangerous?" she asked.
"Not in the least," Venner said. "Don't forget that I am a stranger to Mark Fenwick, which remark applies with equal force to Gurdon. And if we take a fancy to spend a month or two hunting in the neighborhood of Canterbury, surely there is nothing suspicious in that. I am looking forward to the hunting as a means whereby we may manage to get some long rides together, and even if Fenwick does find out, it will be easy to explain to him that you made my acquaintance on the field of sport."
"I am glad to hear you say that," Vera whispered. "I may be wrong, of course, but I feel that strange things are going to happen, and that I shall need your presence to give me courage." Vera might have said more, but a waiter came into the room at the same moment with an intimation to the effect that Mr. Fenwick desired to speak to her. She flitted away now, and there was nothing for it but for Venner to fall in with Gurdon's suggestion of a visit to the theatre. It was not long after breakfast on the following morning that Venner walked into Gurdon's rooms with a new proposal. "I have been thinking out this confounded thing," he said. "I have an idea. As you know, the house where you had your adventure the other night is empty. It has occurred to me that perhaps it may be to let. If so, we are going to call upon the agent in the characters of prospective tenants. What I want to do is to ascertain, if possible, the name of the owner of the premises." "I see," Gurdon said thoughtfully. "I am ready for you now." It was some little time before the friends got on the right track, but they found the right man at length. The agent was not quite sure whether he was in a position at present to make any definite arrangements on the part of the owner. "I presume he wants to let the house," he said, "though I have no instructions, and it is some considerable time since I have heard from my client. You see, he lives abroad." "Can't you give us his address?" Venner asked, "and let us write to him direct? It would save time." "That, I fear, is equally impossible," the agent explained. "My client wanders about from place to place, and I haven't the remotest idea where to find him. However, I'll do my best." "You might tell us his name," Venner said. "Certainly. His name is Mr. Le Fenu." "What do you make of it?" Venner said, when once more he and Gurdon were in the street. "I see you have forgotten what the name of Le Fenu implies. Don't you remember my telling you that the original owner of the Four Finger Mine, who was murdered by the Dutchman Van Fort, was called Le Fenu?" End of Chapter 10.